So this represents our first, at least partial, in-person night ADRC Tuesday noon seminar. Of course, many people are joining remotely, but glad to see some of you here in person. So each year we try to summarize what's been going on in the Knight Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, the state of the ADRC, and that's what we'll be presenting today. My disclosures are here. My research support is all through the National Institute on Aging. I have a number of consulting relationships. These are scientific advisory boards, and no involvement with pharma or other industry related to Alzheimer's disease. So because it's been 2.5 years or two years now going on before we've had a in-person night state of the night ADRC, I thought we just ought to list all of the new additions that we've had in terms of our faculty, scholars, and staff. Those who came in 2020 get special credit because they came just as the pandemic was beginning and the shutdown began. Joy Balls-Berry is a psychiatric epidemiologist who is now leading our inaugural Health Disparities and Equity Core. Jennifer Horenkamp is a nurse, as is Kelly Larkin. Melissa Schicker is working with the research education component and is the coordinator of this Tuesday noon seminar series. Marisol Tahan works with Dr. Hassenstab on the ARC study. Hannah Wilkes is a member of the cognitive assessment team, and Kyle Womack is a behavioral neurologist who also came in 2020. In 2021, Lisa Cash came to the cognitive assessment team. She's the in-person supervisor. Maribel Chabusky joined the Memory and Aging Project as a study coordinator, helping particularly with the affiliated studies. January Harris is our receptionist. Cheris Johnson joined Dr. Balls-Berry's Health Disparities and Equity Core, and Maureen McMillan is another Memory and Aging Project nurse. Maddie Berry, part of the cognitive assessment team. Peachaz Clark is part of Joy's Health Disparities and Equity Core. Jennifer Fish, new social worker in the Memory and Aging Project. Tanya Hart, a new nurse practitioner in the Memory and Aging Project. Yvonne Hughes is a new member of Joy Balls-Berry's Health Disparities and Equity Core. Heather Klemp is a coordinator in the Memory and Aging Project, responsible for our ADNI site as well as our Leeds site. CC McCurry is a phlebotomist and a transcriptionist in the Memory and Aging Project. Abby Roberts begins next month as another new nurse practitioner. And Lena Woods joined the ARC study earlier this year. I want to take a particular moment to thank Maria Carroll, one of our advanced nurse practitioners who's been with us in various stints since the 1990s in the Memory and Aging Project, and for the past 8 or so years really served as my right-hand person in the Memory and Aging Project as operations manager. Maria left us in February to take a position that she sorely is interested in doing from a personal standpoint, and we're very fortunate that Nicole Elmore, nurse practitioner in the Memory and Aging Project, accepted our offer to replace Maria's role. As a matter of fact, we've reconfigured it such that officially now Nicole is the associate director of the Memory and Aging Project. I remain the director. So many thanks to Maria for her many years of service, and to Nicole for taking on this additional leadership responsibility. As we looked towards this leadership change in the Memory and Aging Project beginning in January, when Maria told us her plans, we were very fortunate to entice out of retirement Virginia Buckles, who many of you know is the executive director of the Knight Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. She began with me in 1992 until her retirement in 2019, but she's assisted us in this leadership transition for the past 6 months. So big thanks to Virginia. And this slide says, please welcome Ji Young Han to the night ADRC. It should say, please welcome back Ji Young Han, because Ji Young was here 5 and 6 years ago as a night ADRC postdoctoral fellow. And she went to Worcester, Mass to complete a United States neurology residency, has just completed that and is joining us officially as of July 1. So Ji Young is right here behind Alyssa, so welcome back. You see her family here, her husband Duyan and her daughter Hannah, who's just not quite a year old, right? Pretty next month, a year?
She's going to be 11 months now.
11 months. So, all right, first day of daycare for her. So the night ADRC is tremendous, a marvelous place to work, to try to do something about this terrible illness, Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. And of course, our participants are our bread and our butter, because without them, we can't do any of the research for which we have been funded to do. But we have this tremendous group of faculty, staff, and advisors. This is from 2020, so needs to be updated. But all of you really make the night ADRC what it is. You see me at the top as part of the leadership group, but I want to note Randy Bateman, Dave Holtzman, Carlos Kuchaga, and Krista Mulder. It's remarkable that our night ADRC has such internationally recognized scientists in Alzheimer's disease work. Any of them could lead their own program if they wished. And of course, first with Virginia and now with Krista, we have the absolute best executive director of any ADRC. For today's talk, I want to highlight Marissa Streitz, who recently joined the administration corps, and she assisted me tremendously in putting today's presentation together. As you'll see, our faculty come from many different departments, but I just want to note those who in the Department of Neurology recently have been promoted. And if you haven't, when you interact with them, please congratulate them. So Andy Aschenbrenner now is Assistant Professor of Neurology. As of July 1, as I mentioned, Ji Young will be Assistant Professor of Neurology. And Jorge Libreguera in the Diane and the Diane TU also is Assistant Professor. Eric McDade now is full professor, and Suzanne Schindler, associate professor. And Ganesh Babulal and Ann Fagan are remaining in their current title, but have moved from the research to the investigator track. So this is tremendous. And it's a great pleasure for me to see all of this remarkable faculty continue in their career development and get recognized appropriately for their accomplishments. Here are the different cores and of the Knight Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. Once again, tremendous group of leaders. Thank every one of them listed here and those who I failed to list. The administration core for the Knight ADRC couldn't have a better executive director, Krista Mulder. For the Diane study and the Diane TU study, Randy Bateman leads the administration core. The clinical core, I've already mentioned Nicole Elmore. In the Diane, it's Eric McDade as the core leader. The biostatistics core is led by Kenji Zhang, neuropathology core by Rick Perrin, genetics core by Carlos Kuchaga and Oscar Harari. Mentioned already, our cognitive assessment unit led by Jason Hassenstab. Tammy Benzinger leads the imaging core. Fluid biomarker core is now co-led by Ann Fagan and Suzanne Schindler. Our outreach, recruitment, and engagement core led by Andre Denny. We have a biomarker core in addition to a fluid biomarker core, and our biomarker core is led by Celeste Karch. We have a night ADRC clinical trials unit. I'll try to talk about this in a little bit, led by Joy Snyder. I've mentioned already our Health Disparities and Equity Core, led by Joy Ballsbury, and our research education component, co-led by Joy Snyder and Susie Stark. By the way, our Health Disparities and Equity Core, as far as I know, and as far as I think NIA knows, is unique. There is no other ADRC with a core of this type. So we're really looking forward to great things from this core. So we have this remarkable group of faculty here at the School of Medicine. The faculty come from 13 separate departments. We also have strong ties to the Danforth campus, including the Department of Psychology and Brain Sciences, the Brown School of Social Work, and the Institute of Public Health. But just to show you the broad range of the research being done in the night ADRC, recently, Suzanne Schindler was able to connect with a number of people led by Mahendra Gupta in the Olin Business School. Mahendra is a past dean of the business school and currently the Virgil Endowed Professor of Accounting and Management. And together they looked at the plasma biomarker data and how that could be utilized to facilitate recruitment into clinical trials. So we don't spend a lot of time trying to go through eligibility criteria to see if people have likely Alzheimer's disease. And this collaboration with the business school has been very beneficial. And as I say, I think a publication is due to appear very soon. Then several of you know Matt Gobble from the Department of Political Science. Matt has been interested in using national databases to conduct surveys that tap into relevant aspects of why people do or do not wish to participate in Alzheimer's research, and continues to really aid us in trying to understand what factors motivate people to participate. So broad range of our night ADRC, certainly not just neurology, neuroscience, neuropathology, neuroimaging, et cetera, but broad range. And among our faculty, I've already alluded to this, we have really wonderful early stage investigators who, as part of our mission, is to grow the next generation of Alzheimer investigators. And we try to recognize them throughout the year. Annually, we have the Richard and Mildred Poletsky Education Award. This dates back to 1996, a very distinguished roster of Poletsky alums. Suzanne, are you a Poletsky alum? So just as one example. And this year it was Xiaoyun Chen from the Dave Holtzman Lab, who's the awardee. More recently, in 2018, we began the Blumenfeld Award. This looks to recognize people who are perhaps a little further in their career development than the Poletsky Award, which looks at trainees, students, perhaps fellows. The Blumenfeld Award can also identify people in the very earliest stage of their faculty career. And this year, Yen Li from Diane and Diane TU was recognized. I mentioned Andre Denny is the leader of our outreach, recruitment, and engagement core, and she was recognized with the Popolo Award, which dates back to 2003, and a very prestigious recognition for Andre. We have many partners, both here and throughout St. Louis, including the Greater Missouri chapter of the Alzheimer's Association, now led by Ed Clay. John Berline is chair of the Greater Missouri chapter's board of directors, and both have been very supportive of the night ADRC. I'll talk a little bit more about the African American Advisory Board that aids us in our commitment to be certain that our night ADRC has committed to diversity, inclusion, equity not only in our participants, but in our faculty and our staff. The Harvey A. Friedman Center for Aging is a strong partner led by Nancy Morrow Howe and the Brown School. Matter of fact, the Friedman Center bestows the Koppelman Award that I mentioned for Andre Denny. Hope Center for Neurologic Disorders, more basic science related to neurodegenerative disease. The Barnes Jewish Hospital Foundation has been a longtime supporter and provides funding to support initiatives that could not otherwise be carried out. We get very strong support from Washington University, from the chancellor, from the School of Medicine dean, from our former department chair, Dave Holtzman, who stepped down in September of 2021, and now from the new department chair, Jinwoo Lee. So we're very fortunate in that way. I want to thank our advancement team, as well as the medical public affairs team. The advancement team is led by Pamela Henson, Pam Morris, Linda Haney, and particularly for us, Alex Carr, who's in the back there. Helps us make appropriate contact with our many, many supporters, including major donors and friends, the Charles F. and Joanne Knight Alzheimer's Disease Research Center continues to get great support from the Knight family. Roger and Paula Riney also are tremendous supporters. David and Betty Farrell, the Bush family, and the estates of Daniel Brennan and of Barbara and Reuben Morris. So we're very fortunate. I mentioned the Greater Missouri chapter. They had their annual gala fundraising event at the Ritz-Carlton in May of this past year, and they were very kind to develop a new Beacon of Hope Award, and they looked around for a worthy recipient, couldn't find anyone, so they decided that I should be the inaugural recipient of a tremendous award. And any of you who come to our administration office, I'd be happy to show you this really beautiful glass sculpture to commemorate this. Our African American Advisory Board began in the year 2000, originally led by Norman R. Say. I'll talk about him in just a moment, and has been instrumental in our commitment to diversity initiatives. I said in the year 2000, we had about 97% of our research participants were white. And I said, well, you know, those of you who know me know I'm not very intelligent, but I said, if we only study Alzheimer's disease and white people, we'll only learn about Alzheimer's disease and white people. We need to have our research participants reflect the population makeup of the greater metropolitan St. Louis area. And just to indicate how naive I was, I thought maybe saying that we're committed to that goal will then result in advances towards that goal. Well, of course, it's much more complicated. I soon knew that I needed a lot of help and asked my friend, Norman Say, a noted civil rights advocate and educator here in St. Louis, to form an advisory board, and he did, and it has been tremendous. It helps us become culturally competent, aware, sensitive, helps us try to make certain that we don't look just at recruiting African-American participants, but that we have a diverse group of faculty and staff. People don't like to come into a research setting and not see anyone who looks like them. So this is very important for us. And again, the Health Disparities and Equity Corps is one indication of how we're trying to get this diffused throughout the entire ADRC. Our African American Advisory Board members, many are also memory and aging participants, so they have been through all of the assessments, and they are tremendous ambassadors then to the Black community because they've done it. So they know what they're talking about when they encourage people to sign up. The current chair of the African American Advisory Board is Pastor Douglas Petty, and the vice chair is Reverend C. Jessel Strong, and you see the other members listed here, a tremendous group of individuals. So I mentioned Norman Say is the inaugural chair. Norman had a stroke in 2006. It wasn't terrible, but he felt that he wasn't up to continuing as chair of the African American Advisory Board, so he stepped down as chair, remained an active member until his death in 2019. But when he stepped down, I decided that we should commemorate what he has meant to the Knight ADRC by having an annual lecture in his name, the Norman R. Say Lecture, which first was held in 2016. And it's become an important aspect of our community outreach efforts. The Norman Say Lecture brings in an African-American investigator, faculty member from other areas to share with us their thoughts, recommendations, advice about how we can become more culturally sensitive and competent. And this year, we're pleased that Reagan Durant, MD, MPH, will be the Say Lecturer on October the 11th, 2022. So please mark that date. Beverly Wendland, a new provost, our new provost at Washington University and executive vice chancellor for academic affairs, will provide the welcoming remarks. So we use things like terms like Memory and Aging Project, don't always explain them. Memory and Aging Project was the initial research office established in 1979 when we first received funding to establish a dementia research program at Washington University. I wasn't here then. I didn't come until July of 1982. So this was all led by Leonard Berg, my mentor and role model, and his colleagues. And the Memory and Aging Project brings in research volunteers for clinical and cognitive assessments on an annual basis and has experienced faculty and staff to provide those assessments. The Memory and Aging Project also collects blood for research studies, both genetics and increasingly for biomarkers, and obtains the participants' consent for brain autopsy at time of death. We're funded by the National Institute on Aging to support this research team and these research assessments. The original ADRC grant was awarded in 1985. And I mentioned Charles and Joanne Knight provided a substantial endowment in the year 2000, and hence it's the Knight ADRC. The ADRC grant itself is supported by two large program project grants. The first was awarded even prior to the ADRC grant. The first was the Healthy Aging and Senile Dementia, awarded in 1984. And then a program project antecedent biomarkers of Alzheimer's disease, the adult children study, awarded in 2005. We've been very fortunate. These grants, every time we've submitted a renewal application, have been funded. We have not had funding gaps. Now, the reason I mentioned the Memory and Aging Project is because for our participants, they have no idea which grant we assign them to support their research assessments. They just come to the Memory and Aging Project. That's what they know. So that's our clinical research office. In 2008, we added the Dominantly Inherited Alzheimer Network, DIAN. It's an international study, but our site, Washington University, has recruited and assessed the largest number of any site, DIAN site, of participants, and they too are seen in the Memory and Aging Project. Just for your information, we have until recently had a very inconsistent, very haphazard way of assigning our participants' race and sex or gender. Matter of fact, we have not had a systematic way to do it. Mostly when they come in, we say, well, she looks like a woman, so we're going to check off. Well, we and others need to do this in a more consistent manner. And the uniform data set, which initially was inaugurated in 2007, has gone through its fourth iteration to improve it, and will include these questions that we will now systematically ask our participants. What term do you think best describes your current gender identity? What sex were you assigned at birth? And what do you think is your ethnicity and race? So these questions now will be standard and uniform at the Memory and Aging Project, but across all ADRCs. ADRC, given its tremendous faculty and staff and participants, is always exploring new scientific initiatives. I mentioned the Health Disparities and Equity Core. Project 3 of our recently renewed Adult Children's Study grant is in examining the gut microbiome as a potential mediator of inflammation, which in turn may have neurologic and brain consequences. So for this, now we've not only entered collecting blood and cerebral spinal fluid for our biomarker studies, but now we collect stool in a longitudinal manner to examine the gut microbiome. Project 3 of Adult Children's Study is led by Bo Ansis, and Project 4 is led by Denise Head from the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences to look at the potential role of physical activity, physical fitness in potentially protecting against neurodegenerative disease. Our center, led by Dr. Berg back in the 1970s, developed the what now is the globally accepted clinical staging method, the Clinical Dementia Rating, CDR. We are the guardians of the CDR. I think it has become so well established that there now are 84 translations into non-English languages, and over 12,000 investigators worldwide have become certified in the CDR because it's the standard way to stage people. But it takes time and it takes some experience. So it could have even greater reach if we could do this in an electronic manner where the study participant, with or without a study partner, develops the CDR without the need for an experienced clinician. So we are working with colleagues at University of California, San Francisco, and it's something called the eval study, in which we are trying to develop and validate electronic version of the CDR, self-administered CDR. Mentioned our interest in diversity, and of course we want to know whether people from underrepresented groups have the same risk for Alzheimer's disease or express Alzheimer's disease in the same manner as do whites. And we want to understand the potential influences that may be responsible for any observed racial differences. Some of these influences may relate to one's particular upbringing, educational length of education, as well as quality of education, one's exposure to adverse experiences, to lifelong discrimination. So a life course approach to factors that may influence disease manifestation and risk. We call this social determinants of health, and Marissa Streitz and others have developed a battery, the SS dyad, that we now are incorporating in all of our memory and aging project assessments. You have heard that plasma biomarkers are on the ascendancy, both for beta amyloid as well as tau and different tau isoforms and phosphorylation sites. So we've increased the amount of blood that we take from each participant at their assessments. Our participants for years have asked to know the results of their contributions. If they have a brain MRI, what did it show? If they have an amyloid PET scan, what does it show? If they have a plasma test for tau, what does it show? So Sarah Hartz and Jessica Mazurski received an RO1 to return research results to individuals. And now they've amended this to include not only PET scans, MR scans, apolipoprotein E genotype status, but now blood test results. Jason Hassenstab was interested for many reasons in remote cognitive testing rather than having dependent on our participants coming in to the Memory and Aging Project for a 2-hour sit-down cognitive test battery. And so I was thinking of the Ambulatory Research and Cognition Study, Project 4 of our HASD grant, and very apropos because we had to rely on what Jason was developing once the shutdown began and we couldn't test our participants in person. Eric Music and Yoel Ju from Department of Neurology, both are co-leaders of a new Center on Biological Rhythms and Sleep. And some of you know that sleep has a bi-directional relationship with Alzheimer's disease. Less sleep, higher amyloid levels, more sleep, lower amyloid levels. Alzheimer's disease disturbs sleep. So we're trying to figure out these relationships. Because our participants are so thoroughly characterized and because they are so dedicated and altruistic, we're asked often to contribute to other large studies. One is called the Alzheimer's Disease Onset and Progression, an international cohort study led by Colin Masters at the University of Melbourne in Australia. Another is the Preclinical Alzheimer's Disease Consortium led by Marilyn Albert at Johns Hopkins University. I mentioned the online measures to predict cognitive decline, the ECDR led by Mike Weiner at the University of California, San Francisco. And increasingly the role of vascular contributions to neurodegenerative disease, particularly Alzheimer's disease, need to be much better understood. And we're working with Betsa Zlakovic and Arthur Toga at the University of Southern California to study these vascular contributions to Alzheimer's disease. With the renewal of our Knight ADRC grant in 2020, we were charged by the NIA to find and fund what are called developmental projects. A project that could be supported up to $100,000 a year for up to 2 years. This replaced the old concept of a pilot project. These are a little more substantial. And we had very gratifying number of excellent applications in 2020 when we first awarded the first 3 developmental projects from Nico Barthelemy and Mark Sands were funded by the actual grant, and discretionary funds available to me have funded a 3rd one on adaptive immune responses. Those first 3 developmental projects completed in April of 2022, and we launched our next cohort of developmental projects for the next 2 years. One from Laura Ibanez in psychiatry, looking at multi-omic interactions in Alzheimer's disease brains. Justin Long from neurology wants to study the role of oxysterols and their potential therapeutic capabilities. Vicky Fernandez from psychiatry wants to look at existing drugs to see if using RNA translational analysis may indicate they could be used to treat Alzheimer's disease. And Kanto Hori in the Diane group with Randy Bateman looking at tau microtubule binding in blood samples. So along with all ADRCs in March 2020, we had to shut down. Our in-person assessments, observational research came to a screeching halt at Washington University and everywhere else. And we've been gradually ramping up over the past 2.5 years to now where, with great safeguards for the safety of our participants and our staff, we're about up to 50% of return to what we once did in terms of the number of in-person assessments for our research volunteers. Of course, in-person assessments are much preferable to remote assessments because we want not only to do the in-person assessments, but to have our participants undergo all the other protocols that we ask of them, the imaging studies, the spinal tap to obtain cerebral spinal fluid, the sleep studies, the drive studies, and so forth and so on. So we're gradually getting back to that. We have a ways to go, but we hope that we can return to a semblance of what we were like before the shutdown began in March 2020. Now, the ADRC network has these large populations, cohorts of individuals at each Alzheimer's Disease Research Center and the Knight ADRC as well. So the NIA thought this might be a wonderful opportunity to address the effects of COVID-19. And Carlos Cruchaga, who is a co-chair of the National Institute on Aging work group for COVID, suggested that we could link our research participants' assessments and data with what they have in real life through electronic medical records. Do they have COVID? If they had COVID, what were their symptoms? How long did they last? So along with Indiana and Columbia University, we in the Knight ADRC are going to be inaugurating a data-driven study of using electronic medical records as well as our research records to try to make these assessments. I mentioned, did I mention the Alzheimer's disease neuroimaging? And that should have maybe not. That's a very large study of 60 sites in the United States and Canada to try to understand first neuroimaging, but more recently fluid biomarkers as indications of not only the presence of Alzheimer's disease, but its progression, with the ultimate goal of having those biomarkers used to be surrogate markers for drug effects that may benefit people with Alzheimer's dementia. We've been a ADNI site since its inauguration. Matter of fact, we enrolled the very first ADNI participant across the entire network. Since 2007, I've been the neuropathology core leader for ADNI, and I'm pleased to say that ADNI 4, which is due to begin in about a month, funding in about a month, will mark my relinquishing the leadership of the neuropathology core, and Rick Perrin will take over as the ADNI neuropathology core leader. We have active site here. We continue to enroll ADNI participants in the ADNI protocol. Bo Ansys for many years has led our site. Some of you may know that when Jin-Moo Lee assumed the chair of neurology, he developed a number of vice chair positions. One of them went to Bo for clinical affairs. So Bo is going to transition his leadership of our ADNI site to Justin Long over the next several months. We are also a site in the longitudinal early onset Alzheimer's study led by Liana Apostolova from Indiana University. Kyle Womack is our site leader. And Bo Ansys from neurology and John Constantino from psychiatry, child psychiatry, have been interested for many years in Down syndrome, and we're part of a large multi-center program, the Alzheimer Biomarker Consortium and Down Syndrome Program, led by individuals at Wisconsin, Pittsburgh, and University of California, Irvine, because you may know that every person with Down syndrome, if they survive to age 35 or 40, develops Alzheimer's disease. So this is a genetic risk factor, uniform risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. Mentioned already that we have collecting lots of blood, lots of cerebral spinal fluid, fibroblasts, brain tissue from our participants. We have thousands of samples stored in various places, different cores, different freezers. This has not been integrated. Each core that obtains these biosamples tends to manage them in their own unique way, number of different software platforms to support this. And this means we don't have any coordination across an ADRC participant's involvement in providing a skin biopsy from which fibroblasts can be harvested versus their cerebrospinal fluid. We don't have a way to connect that. Plus, we're overwhelmed with these biospecimens. It can lead to errors, wrong information recorded or information lost. So we've decided to incorporate a large company's software program called FreezerWorks for our sample management, for our sample tracking, and to maintain our sample inventory. FreezerWorks has a number of positives for us, and I think will certainly help each core or project that develops biospecimens, but we can share across cores and projects and have a much more rigorous way to manage the samples than we are currently doing now. We've just begun the process of incorporating FreezerWorks. We had a training session last week. All the cores that are involved in this met with a FreezerWorks representative, and she spent time with each core individually as well as in aggregate, and will be coming back in September. It's going to take some time and training, and it's cost money. So because we think it's so important to have an integrated system, we will pay to inaugurate the FreezerWorks program and to maintain it for the next several years until with grant renewals, we can start to build that into the budget. Now, just because we have this fancy new software platform doesn't mean that anyone can come and just take a biospecimen. We still have to have approved data and tissue request protocols. Any Alzheimer's Disease Research Center has as its core mission the imperative to develop and facilitate Alzheimer's research. That's what we're here for. Hence, we must make our resources, our participant data, biospecimen, the participants themselves, available for sharing. This, as I say, is a core mission for the Knight ADRC. We don't always appear to others to be very welcoming to data sharing, specimen sharing. I think that's a misperception, but nonetheless, it's out there that we are not always willing to share. I mentioned the grant review. We got a comment in the summary statement. A notable weakness of our program project grant was the paucity of external sharing of the data. So that's a perception that we have to address. I think we do a great deal of data sharing. And you see here at the last bullet point that in the last 5 years of the last ADRC grant, we fulfilled 289 requests for resource sharing, including 90 requests outside of Washington University. And this accounted for almost came from grants that totaled almost $300 million. So I think we do share data, but we have to defeat this misperception. Now, it's not always easy to share data. Everyone has their own aims for what they wish the data to support. They're funded to use this data for the aims of whatever grant they have. But overall, we are a data sharing Knight ADRC. To help with this, the Biostatistics Corps for the past couple of years have decided to have semi-annual data freezes at the end of April, the end of October, where data from PET amyloid, PET tau, our clinical and cognitive data, including ApoE genotype and polygenic risk score, cerebrospinal fluid, structural MRI, and neuropathology, will be available for analysis. all data freeze modules available to core and project leaders for the aims of our grants. Affiliated studies can also access these data freezes if they are approved, their request for access to them is approved. And our internal investigators have access to the data from the most recent data freeze. Our external investigators are 6 months behind in that. So we do try to promote utilization of our data first by our own WashU investigators, but we certainly encourage external investigators to use the data as well. I thought a lot about including these representations of some of the tremendous scientific productivity that is directly supported by the Knight ADRC. We could pick many, many different great manuscripts. I picked 5 or 6 just to highlight the variety. The Diane trial unit results were published in Nature Medicine in 2021. The first author was Steve Soloway from Butler Hospital in Rhode Island, and Randy Bateman was the senior author. This reported the effects of solunizumab and gantenerumab, 2 anti-amyloid beta antibodies, to try to see whether cognitive decline could be slowed in treated patients from the Diane study. These are mutation carriers. Both drugs showed target engagement. They both bound amyloid very convincingly. And gantenerumab also benefited downstream targets. So not only bound amyloid and reduced amyloid plaque load, but showed beneficial effects for such things as cerebrospinal fluid tau. However, there was no effect on cognitive slowing for a variety of reasons, including the fact there was no decline in cognition in the placebo group. But the ultimate takeaway from this study is because of the biologic effects that it seems like aggressive anti-amyloid therapy early in the course of preclinical Alzheimer's disease might prevent or at least slow the pathophysiologic progression of the Alzheimer's disease process. Dr. Yang from the Kruchaga Harari labs used protein quantitative trait loci to examine genetic control of protein levels with a goal of assembling the largest known genomic atlas of brain tissue and CSF proteome data that will help identify new genetic loci for Alzheimer's disease, examine proteins implicated in disease pathogenesis, and support the identification of novel biomarkers. This is a tremendous undertaking. In the Dave Holtzman lab, Dr. Zhang studied an anti-apolipoprotein E antibody named HAE4 in mouse models of Alzheimer's disease and found that treatment with this anti-ApoE antibody decreased the amount of cerebral amyloid accumulation and protect the integrity of the cerebral vascular system, giving a biologic support that ApoE could also be a therapeutic target in Alzheimer's disease. Dr. Stojanovic and Denise Head's lab looked at self-reported levels of physical exercise. And although there seemed to be a correlation, more exercise, less decline in cerebral processing speed, overall exercise did not correlate with general cognitive function. So it's still uncertain whether the benefit of exercise for cognition is real, and if it is, what are the factors that underlie that? Suzanne Schindler looked at cognitively normal individuals from the Knight ADRC who had an amyloid PET scan and a certain level of amyloid accumulation in the brain, and said that once a certain level was met, everyone from that point on, almost everyone accumulated cerebral amyloid over the next many years, up to 17 years. And the rate of accumulation was such that it could be predicted and not only predicted for the rate of accumulation, but could predict when that person would come from asymptomatic to symptomatic Alzheimer's disease. A single amyloid PET scan may allow prediction of when someone will become symptomatic. Suzanne calls this the amyloid time hypothesis. And then over many years, the dominantly inherited Alzheimer Network and the Alzheimer's Disease Neuroimaging Initiative, one looking at autosomal dominant Alzheimer's disease, the other sporadic late onset Alzheimer's disease. Do they have the same molecular biomarker profiles? And we reported that they do, and that this suggests, at least supports the idea that the two illnesses, although distinct, one clearly genetic, one less genetic, but accompanied by age-associated disease processes, may have, at least in some pathophysiology in common. Hence, the results from study of one population may inform the other. So preclinical Alzheimer's disease, the major theme of our night ADRC. We want to know if someone has preclinical Alzheimer's disease, will they inevitably develop symptomatic Alzheimer's disease? Can we capture when that happens? And will these individuals then be appropriate targets in the preclinical asymptomatic stage for prevention trials? I mentioned we also want to look at racial differences and how social determinants of health contribute to any such racial differences. I'm going to skip through this. We've been successful. Here in St. Louis University has investigators interested in Alzheimer's disease. The University of Missouri system, the University of Kansas system, University of Illinois system also have investigators interested in Alzheimer's disease. If you add up the amount of NIA dollars awarded to those 4 other systems, that comes up not just about 1/4 of what Washington University alone generates. So we've been very successful in getting awards for Alzheimer research because of the excellence of the night ADRC's participants, staff, and faculty. We have the best participants in the entire ADRC network. We're now following 681. They range from age from 44 to 98. One participant just completed his 35th annual assessment. This is the dedication of our participants. They come from all over, most of them from Missouri and Illinois, but they come from other states as well. They participate in our biomarker studies at a high rate. Over 80% have amyloid PET, over 75% have lumbar puncture. We're enrolling new participants again. So if you have individuals who you think may be interested, please let us know. We're particularly interested in Blacks and in people who have very mild cognitive impairment, but we'll take anybody, so please refer them. I thought this was interesting. Most of you do not know this. In the 1990s, the NIH budget was doubled by Congress. A doubling of the NIH budget. That led to an increase in the number of people who applied for NIH grants. More money, support more research, more applicants. 2003, Congress said, we've doubled the budget, you're on your own now, and the amount of funding available dropped precipitously. We went through a very difficult period with the renewal of some of these grants because of this lack of NIH funding. However, already set in stage by the doubling, the number of investigators continued to increase. So there wasn't really an increase in the amount of awards to individuals. It was flat. Since 2013, now NIH budget has increased again, thanks to Congress. And you can see the amount of awards is increasing. But we still have many investigators who have been unsuccessful in getting these awards. If you're in Alzheimer research, you are fortunate. for the National Institute on Aging, any applicant, if they have a grant with a budget under an annual budget under $500,000, they have to get a percentile score of 10 or less to be awarded. If the grant addresses Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, 28 and less. If you have a program project like adult children's study, if it's a general topic, you have to have a score of 15 or less. For Alzheimer's disease related, 40 or less. Good time to be in Alzheimer's research. Krista pointed out that our other support requirements have changed. We need electronic signatures now. They require much more, the NIH requires much more information than it did in the past. This is just a sample. They want the total award. They want to know what everyone is doing in terms of person month support. And they want to know what we're doing with foreign appointments. I showed you, I'm a member of several advisory boards. I didn't think that was very important, but the NIA does. So we have to tell them about this on our other support pages. And they are very much interested in getting every investigator's total support. This has held up our awards for 2 of our 3 major grants because we haven't done this. I'm going to skip this slide. I've presented it before. Been challenging for us in the clinical trials realm. We talked about aducanumab being approved by the FDA a year ago. It hasn't been the threat we thought it would be because it doesn't have clear evidence that it benefits patients. I'm going to skip these next few slides and come to conclusions. So we're looking to establish our new normal in the post-pandemic area, assuming there ever is a post-pandemic period. I hope there is. We're increasingly incorporating plasma biomarkers in our research and eventually practice. We want to look at the FDA-approved disease-modifying therapies. If not aducanumab, other drugs are coming down the pike. We evaluate the influence of social determinants of health, develop the next generation of Alzheimer's disease and related dementia investigators and clinicians. And we want to prevent Alzheimer's disease. Waiting until dementia occurs may be too late. And the imperative to treat Alzheimer's disease is underscored by our National Institute on Aging budget, been more than tripled since 2012 by Congress. This Friday, Dave Holtzman, who's an associate director of the Knight ADRC, will become co-director. And eventually he will take over for me as the director of the Knight ADRC. This has been planned for several years, but I just want to let this group know that it's in progress as of now. We don't know how long Dave wants to be the Knight ADRC director. I've indicated to all of you all the tremendous accomplishments and staff and the participants and the investigators. It's a real pleasure to be the Knight ADRC director. It's an honor, but it doesn't come without headaches. So I'm looking forward to transitioning the Knight ADRC directorship to Dave Holtzman, but I don't know how long he's going to be around. So I'm grooming some other people too to take over for him. So here are my 2 grandsons. Jack is 7 and Thomas will turn 4 this month, next month. But they have some competition too. I have a granddaughter now. So this is Molly on the Cardinals opening day. And she's just about a month behind Hannah, so she'll be 1 at the end of August. So we have other potential directors in the wings. So with that, I'll stop and answer any questions. Thank you very much.